All right, and we are live. So, Keratismata Daimon, and welcome. Today, my guest is Julia Gordon-Bramer, a writer and a poet, a student of the esoteric, and a professional tarot card reader. One of the top 10 psychics of St. Louis and voted St. Louis's #1 fortune teller by CBS Radio. She's the author of several books on the tarot and on the author Sylvia Plath. And she has a new book out, The Occult Sylvia Plath, published with Inner Traditions. And she's here today to talk about it. Welcome, Julia.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. I'm really, I was so interested and intrigued when I saw the Occult Sylvia Plath title coming from Inner Traditions that I just had to reach out and see if we could have a conversation about it. And
Yeah.
we're going to talk more in a minute, but about that book. But I want to ask you, like, how did you get to the point in your life where you saw that you needed to write a book like this? How did that give us some backstory on this?
Yeah. Well, I was in graduate school getting my MFA in creative writing and fiction. I should say poetry and fiction within the creative writing master's in fine arts. And I've always loved Plath. Plath also wrote both poetry and fiction and nonfiction, which I do a little nonfiction too. And anyway, I was noticing as a professional tarot card reader that there was a lot of tarot symbolism and imagery in Plath's work. And I brought it up to my professor, Dr. Stephen Schreiner at the University of Missouri, St. Louis. And I said, what's up? I haven't heard anything about this. I haven't read anything about this, but look, it's clearly here. Here she's talking about the Empress card, and here we've got the Emperor, and here we've got this, and here we've got that. And he looked at me just bewildered. And he said, I don't know what you're talking about, but I want you to make this your semester end project. Well, it became my life's work.
Wow, that's awesome. That sounds like how you just described how I kind of felt when I was in college. I would always like read things and I would like see like I would see all this occult and esoteric significance in it and wonder the authors like had to read it. But whenever I asked any of my professors about it or anyone, no one wanted to hear.
Yeah.
So
Well, you're going to find, as I have, academia is very atheistic, and they don't want any kind of faith. And but if you do the digging into these writers, I wrote a piece called "Into the Archives" at one time, which got picked up by the AWP Chronicle, AWP Associated Writers Program. And just the fun it is to go into the archives of a writer and to read the unpublished little notebooks and scrap pieces of paper and book marginalia and underlinings and all of these things to really understand what made their brains tick. And so I got to spend 15 years in the Plath archives, basically proving my thesis that not only was Plath aware of tarot and some mystic practices, but she was an active practitioner. And it's the kind of thing that most Plath scholars, they've seen it, but they've kind of poo-pooed it and thought it all just sort of a game. Plath herself did call herself atheist. I think that was sort of her public persona because, she had this history of mental illness and she didn't want to be considered crazy. And, she was over in England and witchcraft had just been taken off the books as a crime just a few years before she got there in the 1950s. So, there were a lot of reasons. And then, of course, when she became a parent later, she didn't want that stigma. So she hid it as many people would.
yeah. And it's interesting that you mentioned that about atheism because I think that that's a general. I think that is you can see that more and more. I see
Yeah.
that more in the world today that people will be taken atheistic. They'll say I'm an atheist as a label thing. Just just kind of, and then if you dig in and you talk with people, you realize they're not really,
Yeah.
complete
You
physicalists,
know,
right? You
there's
know,
a group that considers themselves to be spiritual atheists, and if you search, I think it may be called spiritual atheism, and they still believe in oneness, and they still believe in the life force as something greater than us. They might not be calling it a god in the sky, in the throne, or this paternalistic male image, or some of the other ideas, the traditional fundamental ideas, but that doesn't mean that they're nihilist. It doesn't mean that they're devoid of any sort of spirituality.
right? No, absolutely. So I read that this book was intended to be an introduction for your first book,
Yes, yes.
Stars Govern a Life, Decoding
Right here.
Sylvia Plath. So when and why did you decide it was its own biography?
Yeah, well, you can see this book, which is now out of print. This was came out in 2014 by Stephen F. Austin State University, and it's pretty hefty by itself. It's more like a textbook. I really wanted the introduction to tell the story of Plath and her husband Ted Hughes, and build my case for the basically the translation of her poems, which is what this is. And but it was just too much. It took on a life of its own. I kept finding more and more things. I wanted to get this first book published, and so I wrote a briefer introduction and just kept building and sitting in the archives for the next 15 years, digging myself deeper into this rabbit hole.
So what did you find in those archives? If you can, sum it all up for us here, because I know it's like going to be thick, rich, and complex.
Yeah.
But as far as like her occultism and esoteric interests, what were they along? I know I've seen you the word Kabbalah mentioned.
Right.
Can you
Right.
explain a little bit about what she was into?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So I'm kind of there's a few different directions I could go to answer that question. Um, let me back up the archives themselves. The time I spent there, I was looking at her calendars. I was looking at her scrapbooks. I was reading the books that she read, and taking notes of what she underlined in her marginalia, and just different things that showed of importance to her, that substantiated my interpretations of her work. Now, this first book, and I have actually more books beyond this, and some unpublished, but what I've shown is that Plath's book Ariel, which is this is a her book Ariel. It's a collection of 40 poems. I've shown that what she's done is she's aligned them all with the tarot's major arcana, starting from Morning Song, which corresponds with the Fool card, right through. She gets through the first 22 poems, and then we have 10 poems for the ranks of, the minor arcanas, the 1 through the 10s. And then we have a poem for each of the court cards, for the pages, for the knights, for the queens, and for the kings. And then there were 4 more poems left, and I knew Plath was too much of a perfectionist not to have something going on here. And then I put it together. They're the suits. So she's got a poem for each of the suits: the wands, the pentacles, the cups, the swords. And so this is a perfect study of the tarot. It's so fascinating to me because I began reading tarot when I was 16 years old. I'm 60 today, so it's been over 45 years. And my work with Plath made me a superior tarot card reader because I hadn't gone that deep. I hadn't gone into things like Kabbalah before. So, for those who don't know what Kabbalah is, I like to describe it as sort of a blueprint of all the occult sciences. It's sort of a framework that they all hang on, the pattern, the process that they all use. And so the tarot fits neatly onto the Kabbalah tree of life. Many people have seen that picture. You can look it up easily and see and find how the tarot, there's a card for each station and each pathway on the Kabbalah tree of life. But numerology fits on it, and astrology fits on it, and alchemy fits upon it, and so many mystical practices. And so I think of Kabbalah as the framework, this sort of overarching umbrella that holds all of the mystical practices. As I got into Plath's work in the archives, I realized she was heavily into mysticism in so many ways. She practiced bibliomancy. She did crystal ball scrying. And on the cover of the Occult Sylvia Plath, I do have a picture. This is actually Plath holding her crystal ball. That is a picture her mother had taken. She in the 1950s. So she grew up with mysticism in many ways before she even met her husband, Ted Hughes. Ted Hughes has been widely studied for the mysticism in his work. He has incorporated alchemy and astrology and all kinds of witchcraft and folklore and Kabbalah, and this has been widely studied. There have been all kinds of master's theses on this and books published, but for some reason, no one thought to look at Plath's work in the same light. And she worshiped him, and he was a mentor to her, and everybody knows this. So it's just utterly bizarre to me that I would be the first one to find this after all these years. She died in 1963. That was the year I was born. I was born 9 months after she died. I'm not saying I'm her or anything. I'm not sure I'd want to be her, but it's just amazing that this has been not been found, and to read her work with this new information radically transforms the meanings, and it takes her out of this depressive, suicidal box that we've put her in. I mean, yes, she was that. I don't deny she committed suicide. I don't deny she had some problems, probably bipolarity, but there was so much more to her. And in my work, it's my intention to show that she was a genius's genius, and people have just written her off for her drama all these years. Gwyneth Paltrow starred in a movie called Sylvia in the early 2000s with Daniel Craig, and they nailed them as far as being gorgeous, and the drama and his philandering. That's all accurate, but they forgot to write about the brilliance and and the genius and all that they had done together. They did touch a little bit on the mysticism, which was interesting. There's a scene where Ted Hughes is in a bar and he's talking about how poetry is a spell, and that's very accurate. And what he said, it was not his words. They didn't have the permission to use his words for Hollywood, but they said something close, and so at least they got that much in.
Oh, that's amazing. So you mentioned you got to see what kind of books did she read? What kind of books are
Oh,
there? Like, and the thing that I want to know about is Aleister Crowley. Was she familiar with Aleister Crowley? Had any of that come into the mix? Because
yeah,
during that time period, he's like one of the Kabbalah, major
sure,
Kabbalah like resources.
sure.
I would guess, just like guessing.
So so
Time
I'll tell you a funny story about that. So first of all, I've never found Crowley by name in her work.
period.
However, I tell a story actually in the introduction to Fixed Stars Govern a Life. And I should say that anyone who wants to read this can send me an email and I can send you a PDF. It's discontinued, but I sell the book for $5 by PDF. So just a little thing there. But there's a story in the introduction where when I was doing this work, I became uneasy because, I'll just be straight with you. My background, I started in the Episcopal Church. I have a Christian background. I'm maybe not a traditional Christian. I'm a little, outside the box there. But I read about Crowley, and I think, okay, there's a lot of ego and there's a lot of power games and, you know, just a lot of energy that I'm not interested in. I'm pretty much love and light, you know. but but I was doing my Plath work and I was working on the poem for tarot card number 14, which aligns with the Ariel poem. And I found that Plath, and I described this in my first book, in the interpretation for the Ariel poem, she basically paraphrased a prayer by Crowley that there's just too much of it for me to think was accidental. Not, you know, she didn't rip it off. She was smart, but she knew she got all the elements and the gist of it. And this was a prayer to the great beast 666. And when I read that, I was like, oh my gosh, you know, what have I uncovered? And do I want to go there? And I was really kind of like, are my literary heroes satanic? And is this something I even want to pursue anymore? And I went to bed really troubled, like thinking I might just quit this whole project because it made me that uneasy. And I went to bed, and as I was drifting off to sleep, Plath's voice came in my head. And I know her voice very well because I have listened to many, many recordings. And she said, move through. And I was jolted awake. And I was like, okay, I'll go to the next poem. Just that was all I promised. Well, the next poem, of course, is number 15, poem or card number 15 in alignment with the devil card. She was setting it up. And I, you know, and her work was always so seamless. And that's why the experience of reading Ariel is, you know, it's something that it just goes from you almost can't stop reading it. And it's because one poem sets up the other. And so we had this experience here where she was presenting the devil. and as soon as I understood that, then it was like, oh, okay, you know. And then the next one beyond that, of course, is the Tower card, where it all kind of falls apart because the Tower, you see the crown of the ego on the tarot card, and you know, and that kind of lifestyle crumbles and blows up, you know. And so she had done it perfectly. I was just kind of caught in the moment and a little bit terrified for a bit. Almost to the point of quitting, but she didn't let me quit. And I'll tell you, I've had a lot of signs, just that I'm on the right track with her. When I was in Bloomington, Indiana, in the Plath archives, I was in my hotel room one morning, and I had spent the whole day in the archives previous to that reading her childhood journals. And you know, a 10-year-old's journal is not real exciting. You know, she had a couple moments. She actually wrote about FDR's death, and she wrote about the bombing of Hiroshima. But she also talked about everything she ate that day in summer camp and the radio show she was listening to. And it wasn't thrilling reading, you know. And so I was in my room getting ready to go back in the archives. And I wasn't even intentionally planning to express anything, but I just said out loud, I said, Sylvia, you know, can I skip the rest of 1945? Or, you know, can I go on to your young adult stuff? You know, it's more interesting. That's where all the scholars want to be. And on the TV, which was on, I hear 1945. And I look, and I'll be darned if it wasn't talking about some World War II movie. And so I took that as a sign, like, all right, I'm going to finish it out. And what do you know? I found a lot of very valuable information that day. So I almost walked away from that, and she kept me on it. And then maybe, you know, I've had a couple other blessings. One of the curators at the Lilly Library in Bloomington, Indiana, she gave me a little piece of Plath's hair. There's a sample of her mother had lopped off her ponytails when she was 12, and those ponytails are in the archives. And so she gave me a little lock of that hair. But the best gift of all was in 2021. And as if, I mean, I couldn't have dreamt of anything this great. Dr. Richard Larson, he was a friend of the Plath families, and he helped Aurelia Plath, Sylvia's mother, for many, many years. He was sort of like another son. He knew Plath's brother, Warren. And it was, anyway, he inherited a number of objects that belonged to Sylvia Plath, including a hermetic caduceus, which is basically a magic wand with alchemical symbols that Sylvia Plath herself carved out of wood in her teenage years in summer camp. And it's got a big SP at the bottom at the handle. And he's a very old man now. He's about 80, and he wanted someone who appreciates her mysticism to have that, and it is now mine. And to give you an idea of the value of this, Sylvia Plath's tarot cards, which she did not make, and there's some question as to whether she actually even used this particular pack, but there was a pack of Tarot de Marseille cards that are said to be her possession, that were in her possessions, that were auctioned off in 2020 for over 200,000 US dollars. So you can imagine this item that she hand carved that
Yeah.
and Dr. Larson, he also gave me a high school photograph. I keep it on by my computer here.
Wow.
It's got some writing from Plath's mother on the back of it. Yeah, and I mean, I just feel like I was chosen, you know. Um, I'm not sure what I ever did to deserve it, but I have given my life to this, that's for sure. And I compare myself kind of to John the Baptist, and I'm I want to prepare everyone to see her in a new way and wake up out of this depression, hysteria box that they've put her all in.
Yeah. No, that's like really, really interesting. There's so much to be said. I was thinking about vibrations, like the power of like vibration and reverberations that people create. And you're talking about a wooden panel that was like carved in by her hand, creating this within it, and that like goes and then like comes to you eventually.
Yeah.
I could see how you would feel like John the Baptist with all of these things going on, and the Crowley stuff. I mean that's like so interesting because he's also like the tarot cards, right? There's like an Aleister
Right.
Crowley
Oh,
tarot deck,
yeah.
one of the main tarot decks
Mhm. That's right.
that people
The
are used.
Golden Dawn, our modern tarot, the Rider-Waite, most of them are based on that, that
Yeah.
this, here's the universal weight here, but yeah, they all, Crowley was behind all of that. So,
And that was going to be
huge.
my other question about like occult groups and stuff, is like, it was she or Ted Hughes where they connected with the Golden Dawn, because I know even more. There was like Yeats
Gates.
was
Mhm.
in the Golden Dawn, and the guy that wrote 007, I can't remember his name. I think he
Yeah,
was.
I
Uh,
have no
uh,
evidence of that. I have no evidence that, they were kind of loners. They stuck together and, either in London or in Devon, and when they were social, it was usually either for a poetry reading or something on the BBC, or speaking with editors and publishers. It was kind of all business. Uh, except for the fateful time that they met a couple, Asha and David Wevel, who Ted Hughes ended up having an affair with Asha Wevel, and that was pretty much the end of their marriage. But there's nothing to state that they were even interested in being a part of that, at least not in Sylvia's stuff. There could be, I haven't been through all the Ted Hughes materials. That's a whole other journey that maybe I'll, try for later. But and I wouldn't be surprised if Hughes had, especially after Plath, if he might have gotten interested in some of that. What I can tell you is they were huge fans of W.B. Yeats, and excuse me, and many kind of literary mystics. Lawrence and of course, oh geez, it's all the names are kind of escaping me at this moment. Uh, but I would say that they didn't need the groups. They were very much autodidactic. They were very into their own kind of. He mentored her, and they practiced together. And there's just tons and tons of evidence of this. They had
Yeah.
regular Ouija board sessions. Hughes was a skilled astrologer. Plath wrote that she wanted to be. She wanted them to be like William Butler and Georgie Yates. Georgie, William Butler's wife, she did a lot of automatic writing, and worked with him on recording what he channeled and that sort of thing. So she's written, in plainly for anyone to see, that this was a passion of theirs. But the academics just kind of look at it as a game or a joke.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, so I want to go back and talk about my early experience. I need to unpack my my experience with Sylvia Plath. So when I was in high school, and I graduated like class of '86. Yeah, that's where I'd heard of Sylvia Plath, and a girl I knew was reading Sylvia Plath, and so that's where I had first heard of like Sylvia Plath, and I did not hear of any of the occult stuff.
Right.
If I had heard of the occult stuff, I probably would have gone and read it right away. I
Right.
would have gone right. I would have delved into Sylvia Plath, right after Crowley's Magic and Theory and Practice, and
Yeah.
so I was like reading at that time, but I did not know that. And then I also the story about her committing suicide made me think, oh well, I don't want to. Why do I want to read that? She ended up committing suicide.
Right. Right.
So
Yeah.
so can you talk about that a little bit? Why should that not be? Why is that? Because I do feel like that's the wrong way to think about it, even though
Right.
I
Well,
acted that way. You know.
yeah. So many people, kind of respond to me as if they've outgrown Plath. Like, she's the sad, poet for the college girls and the emo, you know, and
Yeah.
and they do seem to grab onto that truly. But as I said, there's so much more to her than that. Um, you know, your friend in high school, and the first book by Plath that I read in high school was probably The Bell Jar,
Exactly.
which is
Exactly
a
what I was.
very autobiographical novel. You won't find a trace of mysticism in that. However, and I really need to write a book on this, and I just haven't gotten to it yet. I in my first book, which talks about her system, this Kabbalistic system, and how she's basically using the tarot cards in order. I have gone through the Bell Jar, and she definitely wrote that entire novel in this same Kabbalistic system. So you can just look at from the very first words. It was a queer, sultry summer afternoon, this goes in line with the Fool card, which funny. That word queer has the old fashioned meaning. The Fool card can actually take on both meanings of that word, but it begins with that, and almost line by line or paragraph by paragraph, it fits a tarot card in the order of the tarot system. So my book, my original copy of the Bell Jar, is marked up extensively on this card, this card, this card, this card, and when you learn how she wrote everything in this system, it's it almost, it in one way, it shows the magic of the universe, and I think it proves that there's something higher out there. Call it God, call it life force, call it whatever you want. I'm not out to convert anybody. I'm just saying there's something in this system that works. And
Mhm.
so it worked for her in the Bell Jar, and it worked for her in her poetry. Ted Hughes, interestingly, was a little less orthodox about it. Plath she had that German perfectionistic kind of mindset. And so she went, from 0 to 22 in the majors. And as I said, and then the ranks and then the courts and all of that. Hughes would go forwards and backward, and sometimes he would start in the middle, and so his work is a little harder to decipher, honestly. But again, once you learn how to see it and you kind of get the system going, it unfolds pretty quickly, and then you can see that certain poems are, in some cases, she has a poem called "Poppies in October" in the Ariel book that aligns with the Judgment card. And it is perfectly describing the way the Judgment card looks. It's got, the colors in it, and it's got this, she says the lady in the ambulance, and it's got the, the Judgment card has that big Red Cross flag. It's actually King George's flag, but the Red Cross has the same flag. And she has all these sort of touch points that are right there in front of us, and the fields of frost, and yeah, it's amazing what she was capable of doing. And I just get such a kick out of teaching it. So which I have done. I've actually taught classes from my text at Lindenwood University in St. Louis here. I did that for a couple of years, and that's been a blessing, because that gave me some study plans and things, which I have some smaller books that I published. I have Decoding Sylvia Plath's Daddy and Lady Lazarus, kind of the greatest hits, you might say. I
Wow.
self-published these, and
Okay.
and it's just fun to teach somebody how to, let's look at one of her most famous poems and pull that apart. And you'll see, like with Lady Lazarus, she's very much talking about the Statue of Liberty. And at the base of the Statue of Liberty is a poem by Emma Lazarus, by the way. And and it's about freedom and women's rights and all of this fascinating stuff that she's wound into, the tarot card, and that, yeah, it's mind-blowing. It just,
Well,
I could go on and on.
that's excellent. So how did she commit suicide then? How did she get to that? Because
Yeah,
I want to say that I want to believe that when you following things like this, and by unlocking your own potential, that you you know
right. Well,
become great and immune to
yeah, yeah. So I have a few comments to make about that. First, um, getting back to Kabbalah for just a moment. Plath and Hughes knew what they were doing studying Kabbalah, but they poo-pooed a rule of Kabbalah, which the old rabbis used to teach, that number one, you should be a man. Number two, you should be age 40 or older. They didn't believe that anyone younger had that maturity to handle it. Um, I believe, first of all, Plath was maybe one of the first early feminists, certainly in literature. She wasn't going to be held back by a rule like that. Ted Hughes, both of them were brilliant. They probably thought they had the maturity. The punishment that the old rabbis teaching Kabbalah said was, if these rules are broken, the punishment is madness. So I find that very interesting. Now, that said, you can discount that entirely, and still, Plath was not a mentally healthy person. I mean, she had some serious depression. She had her first suicide attempt at 20 years old, which the bell jar talks about. The bell jar also talks about her electric shock therapies, and she had some struggles. So add that into the mix. Then add into the mix that when it all fell apart for her and she was successful committing suicide, this was, her husband had just left her and their two small children for another woman who had been her friend, by the way. So, just a double stab in the back there. She was in another country. It was not the country of her home. She was in England. It was the coldest winter in 100 years. All the pipes were freezing. She couldn't keep the place warm. There was dirty water in the tub that, from everything just freezing and muddy. She had the flu. It was like everything was working against that poor girl at that time. And she just had it. I think she just had a nervous breakdown, basically. So the way she killed herself was the most popular way that people were committing suicide back then, and it was with the gas oven. It was a kind of gas. They called it town gas, and it was much more lethal than anything anybody has today. And so she gassed herself. She didn't have the flame on, of course. She just had the gas going, and she put her head in the oven, and she sealed the door around where her children were sleeping and cracked the window so that they wouldn't get it. And some people, it's been argued, some people think that she was doing this all for show and wanted to be rescued. She did leave the doctor's name and phone number written on a piece of paper on the kitchen table, and there was a nanny expected to show up that morning that didn't. So had that happened, it might have stopped. Had somebody found her sooner, she might have been able to be saved. We don't know these things, but she was successful that time.
Wow. Yeah. So I bet that nanny felt really bad, huh?
Who knows? Yeah, who knows?
No, I don't mean to make light of it. It's like one of those
No.
things that so I mean I'm remembering back to my high school days, and I remember that's like, oh yeah, she baked her head in an oven. I knew that because I was told that like at the
Uh-huh. Yeah,
time that came
not
with
baked. There wasn't heat, but it was
right,
gas,
right,
yeah.
but right, it was an oven, right? Well, you know
Uh-huh.
how kids are in the
Right,
kids
right.
are in the 80s when they talk about things like this. So
Yeah.
uh, so it just makes you go what because obviously we all have like plenty of heroes and idols who committed suicide. And most everyone I know has friends who've committed suicide. I can count a few people
Me too.
who I've lost, and you
Yeah.
always it just always leaves this. I'm not sure what to say about it, or
Yeah.
what always just kind of leaves this question, and death always does anyhow leave kind of a question about it, but it's just always like one of those things, and it's really great when you can move past this, like you're doing, and extract like the gems of value that this person created. You
Yeah.
even like when you said, well, maybe it was an accident. It's possible it was an accident. I'm like, well, gosh, I have an old friend who like committed suicide. And I still go through my head and said no, and try and rationalize, even though it's like 25 years ago. Would
Yeah.
he? I will still go through my mind and try and say, well, maybe it was an accident, and things like that. But to be able to, um, highlight and uncover this real treasure trove. It's a real wealth of like
Yeah.
of knowledge about these esoteric subjects, which so many of us has felt, no, there's something higher about this. People don't get interested into tarot cards and Kabbalah and the occult and esoterica because they um, think it's a road to ruin, but usually because they have some sort of sense that there is something higher within it, that there is something valuable in it that has been missed by the mainstream, and this is why it's been like relegated over here. So it's really really incredible that you're doing this.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I feel like I'm the most blessed person in the world to get this work. It's really a joy.
So, with other occult activities, you mentioned they did Ouija board
Yeah,
stuff. Did they like
regularly.
record like conversations and all
Yeah,
that?
in fact, Plath has a long poem in the collected poems of Sylvia Plath called Dialogue over a Ouija board, where she fictionalized, she changed the name of herself and Hughes, but it's really clearly them. And it was never published until the collected poems put it in kind of the introduction. And so what I've done in the Occult Sylvia Plath, it's a 4-part book. So the first part is Plath as a young girl. The second part is Hughes growing up. The third part is Plath and Hughes together. And the fourth part is what I call After Plath. And it's how Hughes really kind of went off the rails with the occult after. But each part will take the reader into part of that dialogue over a Ouija board. So I bring them back to their Ouija board sessions because it's quite a long poem, and I've just taken all the details that I found beyond that poem, what I knew, what their room looked like, and their kitchen in the back, and and their walks. She may have noted in a journal that they were walking through the fields at night one night, and I've incorporated all sorts of actual facts. There's nothing I've made up, and there's a hefty index at the back of it with my sources and and all of that. So I want everyone to know this is not, this is an absolute factual biography. I have tried to cite my sources in as many cases as possible, but everything in there has come from, either archival evidence or other biographies or memoirs or letters or journal entries. It's a mix of a lot of things just to show their rich and varied amount of occult practice.
Excellent. And she died in 1950, was it?
No, on February 11th, 1963 is when she died.
63.
Yes.
Okay, gotcha. Oh, that's right. And that's the year you were born 9 months
Yeah.
after. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, excellent. So I wanted to ask you some questions about your tarot card practice, your tarot reading practice, because you're
Yes.
you're a professional tarot card reader.
I am.
So how did that happen? How did you end up being a professional tarot card
Yeah.
reader?
Well, that is the first chapter of my other book, which is Tarot Life Lessons. I'll make a little correction. You said my publisher, Inner Traditions. Inner Traditions is the big publisher. The subsidiary that's published both of my books, The Occult Sylvia Plath and Tarot Life Lessons, is Destiny Books. Just
Okay.
just a subsidiary. But you're right with Inner Traditions. But if anyone's looking, they're going to see Destiny.
Okay.
And so as Sylvia wrote in alignment with the tarot, I took my stories of being a professional tarot card reader. I wanted to write a book that I had never read. There are so many tarot books out there that are how to read tarot, but I had been writing just my own journal notes of the stories that blew my mind, and I recorded them, and then in 2020 I put them together for Tarot Life Lessons. So if anyone's interested in that, I'd love to talk to you more about that. The first story, though, in alignment with the Fool card, is my own story. And I'm not going to summarize the whole thing because it'd take the 2 more shows to do that, but I can tell you that I was 16 years old, about the same time I found Plath, interestingly, and I wandered into a magic shop on a hot summer day, and back in the 1970s, to date myself there, magic shops were not like the spiritual places, the metaphysical stores we see today with the crystals and the pendulums and all of that. This was more gag gifts and pulling rabbits out of hats and sponge balls and and flowers you pull out of your sleeve, and I was nosing around, and a very worldly young woman of about maybe 20 years old says to me from behind the counter, she says, "You want to see some real magic?" And she motions me to come over and take a look at these tarot cards. And that was it. I was sold. So
What deck was it?
I believe that, it was so long ago, but I believe it was a Rider-Waite or
Right away.
Universal Weight. And I still think that's the best deck, the best one to learn from. The symbolism is right on. I have other favorites. I talk a lot about the Alchemical Tarot by Robert Place. This is a very, very favorite deck of mine as well. But I think, and it's very Rider-Waite based, you know. Um, I think Rider-Waite is what the beginning tarot card reader should use to get it down, to understand the system, the symbolism, all of that.
That's awesome. Well, so I have to share with you, um, when I was like, I don't know, 13, 14 years old, and whenever that was, early 80s, um, I had read about the tarot through like library books. Eden Gray, that's a tarot author, right? Right. So I
Yeah,
read
uh-huh,
about the tarot and I was like, this is so great. I wish I could get a tarot deck. But see, I lived in Lincoln, Nebraska at the time. There's not tarot decks for sale everywhere like there are now,
uh-huh.
you know.
Yeah,
And
right.
you know, I didn't even think it was something that you would be able to buy. You could only like, just get it from an old gypsy or something. But then I went to in Lincoln at the time. There was a shop called the Fun Shop, and it was a gag shop, exactly like you're saying. They sold fig doo doo and switchblade combs and
Right.
you know fart cushions and all of that stuff.
Flies
Uh,
and ice cubes, yeah.
right, all of that junk, and that's a place where kids love to go into that. Love to go to that kind of stuff. And there, I found a there was a real tarot deck there, and it was the Aquarian tarot deck,
Okay,
which I
nice.
which I bought.
Beautiful deck.
Yeah, which I bought. And it was a lot of money for me at the time. I can't remember what it was, like $12 or something. But and so that became the deck that I started. I mean, before this, I had started to actually draw out all the Rider-Waite stuff like on paper to try and just create my own. And I didn't get much. I didn't get past the major arcana really.
Uh-huh.
But then when I found this deck, it's like that just like opened up a whole new world, and it's really amazing how that it has spread from something that was like total obscurity, totally like, which I think this is something that you're talking about a lot in these books, like Sylvia Plath, and well, she could never mention this,
Right.
that'd be very harmful for her career at the time to even mention that you even know about something like that, let alone have a deck, at home. And we've gone from that to where tarot decks are like everywhere. It's like a new,
Yeah,
people are like, and it's gotten to the point where people can, it's just the market of being able to create them has like become so huge that there's
right.
so much. But the cool thing about the tarot, though, is that even though there's different versions of it, there's these principles in it, which you mentioned, like the Kabbalistic principles, the numbers, you know, the the alchemy, the elements, and all of that stuff that are like consistent and universal over time. And I think that's
Right.
like something that really appeals because there's so little that displays that consistency, out there,
Yeah.
that it's a wonderful thing.
And that's Kabbalah really. Kabbalah just sort of has organized all of that. So that there is a system and they do relate, and tarot is such a beautiful way to hold all that together. Tarot's got the numerology, it's got the mythology even, it's got the alchemy, and yeah, it's just I think a beautiful dream in pictures.
Yeah, definitely. So what is your favorite spread?
I probably my go-to spread is probably a horseshoe spread, kind of triangular. I think that
Hmm.
does the job for a lot of clients when they want to know, about a relationship or their work or their money. So that's probably my most used. If I have a new client who has no sense of the tarot, I'll probably start with the Celtic cross,
Hmm.
just because that gives them a way to trust me, I think, because I can show them a little bit of past and present before we get right into the future stuff. So that can be helpful, I think, and just they don't know me from Adam otherwise, and if I'm just barking out what's going to happen, they may or may
Yeah.
not believe that. So I think that kind of helps, cement something between us before I get into the future stuff. Uh, I do a lot of just 5 card spreads or even 3 card spreads for quick questions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like those 3 and 5, just real simple, real
Mhm.
simple type things. But I don't do any reading for other people other than you know like I've done it in the past at parties and stuff like that. But
Yeah.
so, how would you articulate what is the difference between your approach and the experience, the difference between reading for yourself versus reading for another person?
I generally only read for myself if I can be kind of unmarried to the outcome. Because I think my own bias, hopes and dreams or fears may take over. I will. I'm not able to see for myself, if something I intensely care about. Now, if I can be just sort of open, like, how's this day gonna go, or when is something that I'm just kind of that I'm not shattered if it doesn't work out well. Then I would read for myself. When my son was in a band and he was touring Europe, I may tell him how the tour will go, but I'm not going to look into matters of his safety because that's I'm a little too attached to that. And and so I have to be careful on just if I may want to sway the answer.
Right. So that's a good question. So what do you ever do a reading for someone and it's like the cards are just bad? Oh, it looks like you're gonna lose everything. You might die. Your friend might. Does that ever happen? Does that ever happen? Do you
Well,
get that message and then how do you give that to
yeah.
them? Do you try and
See,
put a positive spin on it?
I I do give bad news. I think it's a heads up to do something differently.
Hmm.
I tell I tell my clients, I can read your cards because we're connected just by being alive. I call that life force God. I don't tell people how to do God, what to call God. That's your business. But if you can go there, if you can say, okay, I'm alive, I'm hooked into this God system, then I have great power as a child of God, and I can affect my outcome. And so I'm showing what's gonna happen organically as things are going. And, really, I'm showing them what they already know on a higher subconscious level, and I'm mirroring it back down to them, So they might be like, "Oh, yeah, I have been slacking," or, "Yeah, I have been drinking a little too much," or, "I better not take that chance," or, "I knew he wasn't any good for me, and now's the time to break up," that kind of thing. Um, I do believe that I'm gonna show them what they're meant to know, so I think it's a very irresponsible reader who says you're gonna die. I mean, we're all gonna die. That's a
Right.
fact.
Yeah.
To say it's gonna happen tomorrow, or sometime, in the near future and scare the living daylights out of somebody is not appropriate. That's not something our higher self would know, and in my belief system, it isn't something we should know. Now, I might give a warning. I might say I see an accident or a very poor decision that you'll regret, and we might dig into that and find out what and where and how and try and pull that apart to prevent it. But but I'm not going to just scare the life out of somebody.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, what about if do you ever drop a reading for someone and you just get nothing?
It doesn't happen a lot, but it has happened. And I do think that some people are kind of blocked. Uh, they're not the usual people who come to me. I mean, of course, if you come to me, you want a reading generally, especially if you're paying for it. So there would be no reason that you'd be all closed and blocked. Now, people who have been closed and blocked, That usually happens in party situations where the host is paying, and so they have no investment. And maybe someone said, "Oh, come on, just sit down in front of her, just get it, just have your cards read. Don't be a spoil sport." I've had that kind of thing, and I've told those people, if you don't want this reading, I don't want to give it to you. I want to
Right.
have that openness. Um, I had one guy once though who just wanted to give me trouble, and he sat down and he threw my cards in my face at me. And he's like, "These are all just pieces of cardboard." And I'm like, "Yeah, they are. And there's a lot of wisdom on them."
Yeah.
So good luck to you.
Right. Yeah. Some people are beyond help.
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
definitely.
yeah. Um, so there's a word that Aleister Crowley used, and I believe that he got this from the Golden Dawn, and it might have Kabbalistic origins with things, but the
Mm.
idea is holy guardian angel.
Oh.
And now, is that something that you're familiar with?
Well, of course, we've all heard of guardian angels,
Right.
and
The idea, and
they're
I'm generally referring to the idea of a higher, that you have a higher every individual has their own higher intelligence uh,
yeah, yeah.
perspective that we're kind of cut off from in ordinary life.
Right. Like I have done some reading on angels, Doreen Virtue, more recently, like Kyle Gray, if you know him, he's done a lot about angels. Um, I gotta say, I don't deny them, but that isn't where I get my information. That just doesn't speak to me. I mean, maybe they do, and maybe they're all laughing like in the room right now and just like, you know, but I just call it spirit, and maybe if angels are guides, I suppose there could be something there. I've just all chalked it up to spirit, and so I think that's the beautiful thing about mysticism is there are different ways for different people, and I don't think there is just one way. And if angels speak to you, run with it. Um,
And so I
yeah,
meant, just to clarify, I meant more in terms of that's connected with the individual
like
rather than
uh-huh,
the spirits and demons all flying around out here, which
right,
there's not a lot of evidence for, and I think seeing the world that way kind of leads in a different direction other than the sort of self introspection that I think is like the powerful tool that the tarot um,
yeah,
offers us, and that
yeah.
idea that the tarot, like one perspective on the tarot, is that utilizing the tarot, and I think you touched on this, that when you're reading with another person, you're kind of like tap, because of life force connection, you kind of like tap into the vibration of their higher perspective, right? Which
Mhm.
already like which knows what they should, already knows, you should quit drinking and staying out late, and all the things that you need to do, and you're just helping them kind of connect with that. And so, and I mean, I consider kind of the same if you're like reading tarot for yourself. This is a way of, for me to try and get in touch with my own higher awareness of things.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, what? I think sure, everybody probably has some sort of spirit being, whatever you wanna call it, guardian angel or guide, that's connected to them to help or assist, and maybe some have numerous ones. I don't know. I don't know the details there. I
Sure.
just know what works for me personally, and I do think it's a very personal journey.
Yeah. So what about questions like and this connects with Sylvia Plath. What do you think about afterlife, life after death, or life before death, or any of those things? Do you have a
Yeah.
model that you usually work from, or?
Yeah, well, I'm a teacher in A Course in Miracles, and that's kind of my go-to. I I personally think there's a lot of evidence for reincarnation, that we do it again and again until we get it right.
Mhm.
And I kind of like George Harrison's words and give me love, keep me free from birth, to get it all in this life done, and so we don't have to repeat our mistakes over and over again. But yeah, I kind of lost my train of thought there.
Oh, it's all good. Afterlife type things.
Oh, yeah.
No, it's all a big mystery, but I kind of resonate with what you said about
Yeah.
um, reincarnation. And
I
it's
think heaven and hell are here, and I think
Mhm,
it's how we choose to live. And
mhm.
if we choose to live in the light, and if we choose to be a gift to this world, and to live in oneness and connect, or if we're in misery or depression and anger and hatred, and that's the hell.
Yeah, good. Profound words. So I want to thank you, Julia, for this great conversation. It's
Thank you, Paul.
given me lots to think about, and hopefully our viewers more to think about. Your book is available now through can people get it on Amazon and
Everywhere. Yeah, all the major
everywhere?
booksellers. Uh-huh.
Okay,
That's both books available, by the way, also Tarot Life Lessons, in addition to the Occult Sylvia Plath.
excellent. So we will put all of the links for where people can get that. We'll put all of that in the show notes here.
Fantastic.
People will be able
And
to track this stuff down.
if you'd like to see a picture of my hermetic caduceus, I have that on my Instagram page at J. Gordon-Bramer. So look me up on Instagram and scroll down a little bit. I posted it in, I believe it was May of 2021, but you
Mm,
can see a close up of the caduceus and me holding it, and the initials SP, which is pretty
excellent.
wonderful. Yeah.
Excellent. That's awesome. All right. Well, thank you, Julia. I wish you the best of luck, going forward. I hope the book does incredibly well and everyone buys it and reads it and educates themselves on this unknown facet
Yeah.
of Sylvia Plath that is really a game changer. It's history changing. It really
It
is. It
is.
really
It is.
changes. It really changes things. So,
Yeah.
um,
Thank you,
so
Paul.
thank you very much, and keep the dark fire burning.
Take care.
Take care.